Moving on to women's suffrage, we initially see an alliance between women, the anti-slavery movement, and those who believe black people should have the right to vote. They shared their underlying ideas and many of the activists, and many of the arguments were the same. These arguments were basically that people are given certain inalienable rights by their creator, and we all should have the same rights and privilege that other people have. Women should have the same rights as black people, who should have the same rights as rich white males. That includes the right to self-determination and the right to vote. Suffragists, those who wanted to get women the right to vote, felt betrayed when the Civil War amendments enfranchised newly freed black men, but not white nor black women. However, this resistance to women's suffrage was gradually overcome by social forces working for change. This was obviously a long, complex process that I'm simplifying down into one slide here. But some of the biggest factors were the expansion of education for both sexes, the entry of women into the workforce outside the home during World War I, and a political demand. Similar to the expansion of rights of poor white males, this wasn't something that happened overnight, but something that was rolled out to states slowly. The Western territories were the first to grant women the right to vote, and it spread from there with more and more states beginning to adopt the idea. And many politicians believed that they could win the women's vote by supporting the expansion of this vote, thus giving themselves an advantage next election. The Southern Democrats were the final holdouts, feeling that it would enforce federal support of suffrage for black people, and many held out until the 19th Amendment passed until 1920. As you all probably remember from your U.S. history classes, after the Civil War, the states were forced to ratify the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. These amendments specifically banned slavery and extended rights to former slaves, and the 15th Amendment explicitly banned states from denying the right to vote to people based on their race. They could still deny it to women, but black men were supposed to have the right to vote at this point. However, the legal requirements didn't match up with the reality, particularly because states were the ones who ran elections, and plenty of states didn't have a problem denying black people the right to vote. This is something we definitely talk about more in the civil rights chapter coming up, but we had things like whites-only primary elections, threats of violence and lynching if black people tried to exercise their right to vote, and general intimidation combined with legal recourse like grandfather clauses and poll taxes. The Voting Rights Act banned these things and made it easier for black people to exercise their rights. The final legal expansion we're going to talk about here is the expansion of voting rights to 18-year-olds. This was motivated by the Vietnam War, where 18-year-olds were considered adults who could go off, be drafted in the military, fight, and die for their country 3,000 miles away in a jungle somewhere, but they weren't considered old enough to vote. This idea gained a lot of support domestically, and resulted in the passage of the 26th Amendment in 1971, officially lowering the voting age to 18. So what exactly happened after expanding the right to vote? Well, it turns out that the Founding Fathers' fears were unjustified. The property list didn't immediately vote to take away the rights of those with property, and if we flash forward to 2014, we saw research that describes America as an oligarchy, where politicians are accountable only to the wealthiest corporations rather than the median voter. Women didn't immediately alter the pattern of voting either. They didn't have a clear partisan leaning until the 1980s. Ironically for them, this made it tougher for them to gain the right to vote because neither party saw an advantage to letting women vote, so neither party wanted to bear the costs of working to give them suffrage. Even today, we don't see as much of a gap for women as we do for black voters or other ethnic minorities. Single women tend to vote much more democratically, while married women tend to be a little more Republican. This balances out, and women are not as overwhelmingly Democratic as you would expect. We certainly saw this in 2016 with Hillary Clinton's election, where Hillary doesn't win the woman's vote as much as I think many people are expected her to. For all the drama given 18-year-olds to the right to vote, turns out they voted in lower numbers than any other group who had newly gained suffrage. 2008 and 2016, we saw this number increase with more and more young people start to vote, start to find it exciting, get excited for Barack Obama, things like that, Bernie Sanders in 2016. But that's a recent phenomenon and has only happened in the last decade or so. Going back to 2004, you saw the Democrats thinking young people would turn out for John Kerry. 2000, they would vote for the political dynamo that was Al Gore. That didn't happen for, obvious reasons. On the other side, the 14th and 15th Amendments didn't immediately grant the right to vote to black people, but a whole 100 years later, when the Voting Rights Act was passed, they gained a positive freedom to vote. In modern time, we see things like voter ID laws, disenfranchising felons, things like that, and these go from state to state. Automatic voter registration has been a big thing recently. We've seen in Oregon and now Illinois and potentially some other states going forward. The battle over who can vote is a contentious one, and it's unfortunate because it's a political right, and restricting people's rights based on, imaginary voter fraud, or, trying to expand it based on automatic voter registration, the idea of should felons be able to vote. These are all political fights, and it's unfortunate because these are very real issues and very real positive rights that people should have, regardless of what the consequences are to the people in office. Perhaps they could represent us better rather than restricting who can vote to the people they represent. Much like we'll talk about in the redistricting chapter with Congress, it's politicians choosing their voters rather than voters choosing politicians.